Hello again, I'm just getting this fixed up. Well, I want to talk this time about Clinkham Wood, because that's where I lived in the 1950s. We did go to Holy Cross School and we got the bus there because there wasn't any schools then in Clinkham Wood or around there. But anyway, it was a nice place. First of all, there was a big wood, and I'll tell you about that later on. And then there was all these avenues named after places in the Lake District: Loughgrigg Avenue, Lawton Avenue, Ullswater Avenue, Bassonthwaite, Dalehead Place, and so on. It was lovely names. And the one I lived in was named after the biggest lake, Windermere Avenue, still there today. We lived at number 21. And it was about 1950 when we moved there. We lived in Junction Lane, I think number 41, opposite the cinema, and then in Vincent Street near Holy Cross with my grandma. But finally we moved out to Clinkham Wood. But we'd go out the front door of number 21 and it was on the hill. And you know, if you look back to St Helens, I counted them one day, 30 chimneys, all the way across the skyline on the other side of the East Lancs Road. Couldn't believe so many chimneys. And a lot of them with smoke coming out. And when the wind blew from the south, it blew all over Clinkham Wood. And it was quite smelly, but nobody said anything in those days. But I want to talk about the people who lived in Windermere Avenue, because they were great. One of them was the O'Neills further down, near the roundabout. And Mrs O'Neill, she had sort of a bit of Irish in her, so she used to invite us in now and again. And one day, it was the time that Queen Elizabeth was crowned. We all went into her front room and we watched the coronation on the very first telly we'd ever seen. It was about 17 inches, black and white, and we were all glued to this coronation. It was amazing, so special. Nowadays it's changed. And then I remember meeting Eddie O'Neill in the Mossbank pub, and he used to go down there. He was about 30 now this time, and he'd have about 4 pints of bitter, and then he'd go home, walk home and have a big curry. And he was a great lad, but he was a bit too overweight. And he was about 30 odd. I thought he'd never get married, but the next thing he does, he married a lovely girl. And then, not long after, for some reason, he passed on, so it was very sad. But then there was the Lynches further up, Mr. and Mrs. Lynch and the Kilgannons and the Browns. And the Browns used to, Mr. Brown and Mr. Lynch, used to come to the front where the privet edge was, and they'd lean on the gate, just taking it easy and watching people pass by and having a chat as they went past. Oh yeah, and all the other Warrens and the Anders, Alan Anders and Roy Anders, they were rough. And Mrs. Anders, she was next door but one, she always shouting and roaring. But I think Roy turned out well, because he married a good girl and she quieted him down a lot. Then there was all the Lawrensons further up. They were noisy, rough lot there was. She was a teacher, Mrs. Lawrenson, and he was like a chief of police, but they were tough. And there was about 8 of them, but we didn't really mix with them that much because they were so noisy and we were sort of quiet. But it was nice, Windermere Avenue, I liked it. And we had lots of friends there. And I mentioned some of the names because they've all gone now. I remember Rosie Bacon. I like that name, Rosie Bacon. And she lived on the roundabout at the bottom. And then Mrs. Lunt. Mrs. Lunt was a dark-skinned woman. She had lads like Brian, I think he was in my class, and they were dark too. And she always went to St. Peter and Paul's Church and prayed. She always went on the left-hand side. She was always praying like that, but she was a good woman. She did Irish dancing with me mum. But they sort of stood out a bit then, the dark people, because there wasn't many in St Helens. But she was all right, And Mrs. Forshaw, and the Bromillows, and Mrs. Thompson. I seem to remember the boys and girls with snotty noses, because I'm sure Rosie Bacon had a snotty nose, and I'm sure Terry Thomas from next door but one going down had a snotty nose. But that was Clinkham Wood. One thing I do remember was the gangs they had. You wouldn't think that. But one time there was like these gangs of teddy boys, and they had the car millers and the moss bankers and the Clinkham Wooders. And they used to fight in the woods. And they used to get little marbles or stones and put them in catapults and shoot across in the woods. It was very dangerous. Then they'd charge through the wood and everybody'd scatter. And if they caught anybody, they'd scrag him. Don't think they beat him up, but they'd scrag him. But I can still remember seeing a gang of car millers marching down the road, about 20 of them, all heading for Clinkham Wood to beat them all up. Very funny. But anyway, that's just a bit about Clinkham Wood. Next time we'll talk about things we did there, and maybe our family who lived in Clinkham Wood for most of our lives. But it's good to mention Clinkham Wood, because I can't find anybody mentioning it. And it's a funny name, Clinkham Wood. If anybody knows what it means, they can tell me, because it sounds so different from all the others. Okay, we'll see you later on. Bye from Tony, who used to live in Clinkham Wood. Bye.